I'm excited to release this episode with Dennis Pilarinos. Dennis is the founder and CEO of Unblocked. Unblocked finds the answers you need from your team's code, discussion, docs, and more. This was a really fun episode. Dennis has a really interesting background, including a few acquisitions, one by Apple acquiring his previous company, helping launch the Amazon and AWS office in Vancouver. We talked about dev tools, AI, and much more. This was a lot of fun. Before we jump into the episode, I want to talk about our 3 podcast supporters. VanHack. Let me introduce you to VanHack. Startups of all sizes choose VanHack because they only offer handpicked developers with 3 or more years of experience and who have strong portfolios. Great Canadian tech companies like Neo Financial, Fair, Wattpad, Applyboard, and League have worked with VanHack and they had an amazing experience. Go to vanhack.com and check out their talent pool without having to log in and see for yourself. And when you sign up, tell them Evan from The Hard Part sent you for a 25% discount. Float. Float is complete business finance for Canadian companies. They offer modern financial services, powerful software, and industry-leading support designed for every industry and stage of growth. Their integrated suite of products include corporate cards, FX, bill pay, expense management, and high-yield accounts, and gives finance teams everything needed to manage spending and cash flow efficiently so they can keep pace with the demands of their business. To learn more, visit floatfinancial.com. Bloom. Just because the economy is uncertain doesn't mean your shred claim has to be. Bloom is all about predictable value. They're the only shred firm that guarantees their work. They meet with you every quarter and show you exactly how much you've accrued. And their pricing is posted online with a cap, so you know what to expect. No guessing, no surprises. Head to shred.ca and see why more Canadian innovators choose Bloom. Without further ado, here's the episode with Dennis. Hope you enjoy it.
Dennis, I guess I want to start with just when we did our pre-chat and I first chatted with you, just super interesting background, like Microsoft, like launching the AWS office here in Vancouver, Buddy Bill, which was acquired by Apple. There's a bunch of things there. So obviously kind of a broad question, take it however you want, but I don't want you to put all your background into just one kind of answer, but I'd love to kind of touch on all those things because I think it's super interesting.
Sure.
So
I'm not sure what the question is there, but I could tell you a little bit more about myself. Is that what
about yourself. I think there's just some stuff kicking off the AWS office here. I think that's an interesting story as well.
For sure. So I went to school. I could actually see the school from here. I went to Simon Fraser University. I did a degree in computer science and business. I did an internship at Microsoft, which resulted in a full-time job. And I loved it. I worked there in headquarters in Redmond, Washington for 7.5 years. We can talk about the products, but basically I've been building developer tools or developer platforms my entire career, and that really kind of started meaningfully at Microsoft. From there, I actually wanted to move back to Vancouver. I grew up here, I love it here, and I looked for opportunities, and there was an opening to, contribute to the development center that was being built here for Microsoft. So I came back, did that for a little bit, moved to San Francisco. AWS had said hey, we're looking for someone to build this project. It's kind of a cool new project that we're working on. And I had campaigned to do that within the context of the Vancouver office. So yeah, I was AWS employee number 1 here, and I think, 2,500, 3,000 people here now.
Yeah.
But really, the intention behind kind of moving back to Vancouver is, I guess I'm a bit of a homer, but I wanted to create an ecosystem in any way that I possibly could to give people an opportunity to work on something that they cared about. Developer tools is niche-y, but if you care about that in a place that they loved and get paid well doing it. And so when I thought about the most leveraged way of doing that, working for these anchor companies like Microsoft or Amazon gets that flywheel kind of moving.
Yeah.
But I kind of figured the best way to actually do that kind of at scale was to actually go and start my own company. And so that was one of the factors that contributed to starting Buddy Build. And so Buddy Build went from inception to acquisition for 3 years, and we brought another kind of major company here. Had a smaller presence, but increasingly large presence here, which was Apple. And so the opportunity to, again, create jobs basically for people here through those anchor companies and through startups is already starting to pay off. With Unblocked, we are hiring people who have worked at, shockingly, AWS or Microsoft. And that ecosystem effect is, a decade later, still kind of starting to pay dividends, yeah.
What did you learn through the Buddy Build, inception through exit? That timeline's also quite quick as well, and being acquired by a very notable company that probably everyone in the world knows. I'm just kind of curious, what went through that process? What was that like? Again, not every founder gets to go through an acquisition, especially like at a pretty rapid pace there.
Yeah, I mean, I think acquisition processes are unique to every company. Buddy Build had been doing quite well. We were used by tens of thousands of developers around the world. It was for iOS and Android. It's basically it gave engineering teams a way to quickly iterate on their workflow, on the way that they build software. And so I think it got onto the radar of Apple pretty quickly because we solved a lot of like pain points. And they kind of approached us to explore how we might work together. And so we spent probably the better part of a year trying to figure out what that might look like. And our acquisition process was, very slow and then very, very quick. And what I mean by that is like I actually spent the time to write down a list of non-negotiable things that I was not willing to flinch on. So before we talked about like what the acquisition price would be, I was like, well, I'm not moving back to California. I'd spent a year there, just under. Neither is the team. We had some constraints around how we wanted that transaction to operate. And slowly we kind of checked that list off. And once we had clicked all those things off, the last thing to talk about was actually the acquisition price. And so that conversation lasted, I don't know, maybe a week or 2 weeks. We're like, yep, everything else, the things that quote unquote mattered were already there. It's a cool story of like how the rest of it transpired, but I guess my NDA is over, but I don't know. We'll talk about it another time maybe. But yeah, it was really, really neat.
Going through that acquisition period, I'm assuming you had to spend some time with Apple. Curious, like why jump back into being a founder? Like do you just like it? Was there like a new idea that you just couldn't get out of your head? Like, hey, I need to build this. Like, just kind of curious about like jumping back into it.
Yeah, you're catching me on a Friday afternoon on a long week, so I'm like, why did I do this again? That's a terrible idea. No, I mean, so I distinctly remember when it kind of happened. So I took a year and a half off after my time at Apple. And I'm a recreational pilot. I have a little Cessna that I like to fly around. And so I flew it from Vancouver to Halifax with my then girlfriend, who's from Halifax and now wife. And she flew back commercially. She had to go back to work, and I didn't have a job. Right? I can kind of do whatever I want. It was actually kind of weird. Like, we met on one of the dating apps, and I was thinking about it from her perspective. I'm like, this guy doesn't have a job, right? He doesn't, I was kind of like not really living anywhere, just kind of exploring or whatever. I don't know why she decided to go on a date with me, but it worked out. Anyway, so we did this trip. She flew back, and I was like, I got nothing to do. So I flew down the east coast of the US and across the middle of the country. And you know those flyover states that people always complain about when you're in a big, fancy commercial 737 or 777 or whatever it is. Well, those flyover states get to be really, really big when you're in a small airplane that goes very slowly. And so I started thinking about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and I really missed the team that I worked with. And so I started kind of reflecting on problems that bothered me. I always like to say, I'm a relatively impatient person, and I'm a very mediocre developer. And so all these things that I try to do that are too hard to do, I was like, we should probably try to fix that. That was the genesis of Buddy Build, and it was the genesis of Unblocked. And so in that flyover state, I'm kind of like, this problem really sucks, and I really miss those people. So when I landed in California to visit some of the investors, I was like, hey, I don't know, I'm too kind of young to quote unquote retire. I'd love to do this again. And so they said, yeah, we'd love to support you. I flew back to Vancouver, and we got, quote unquote, the band back together. So the first kind of largely 10 people, more or less, who started Buddy Build got together. They'd left Apple, and we started Unblocked together.
I'm sure there's like obvious advantages to like getting the band back together, people that you work with, there's just trust, everyone's capabilities, strengths, weaknesses. Is there other kind of things that are like less inherent or things that are like just super awesome about doing that? I'm sure it's just fun as well, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we were just chatting downstairs, right? You're going to go hang out with a bunch of your friends that you went to university with, right? And so like when you build these memories and you go through these experiences, having the opportunity to work with those people again, it's just like incredible kind of opportunity. It's a double-edged sword though, right? So they know the eccentricities. They're like, if you need a significant decision to be made, don't talk to Dennis before lunch because his blood sugar is low and it's not going to be a good conversation. So, we know our little things or whatever. I've tried to manage that. Good feedback to get. So that was one. But the flip side of that is like, some of us have been working together. Like those folks had worked together at Amazon, right? And so I've worked with some of these folks for 12, 13, 14 years. And so you start to develop potentially blind spots for how a company works or its culture or what have you. So as we bring new people in, we try to make sure that we are explicit around kind of our kind of core fundamental cultural principles, and ensure that we can adapt and grow to new members in that organization as well. But yeah, so it's great in many ways and probably broken in ways that we don't necessarily see immediately, but we will over time.
What kind of nuances are involved with like building companies for developers, building dev tools? Like obviously every company's hard and has its own things, but with developers specifically, like what kind of like things like is you have to focus on certain things more than other pieces? Like how do you kind of see that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people, as they build startups, get this advice, which is like, fake it till you make it. And that is like the anti-pattern for a developer tool. Developers have strong opinions. And if they smell bullshit, it's game over. Like they're not going to use the product again. So it is one of those things where as we build the company, we did this in Buddy Build and got a lot of like kind of flack from our investors at the time. And we did it with Unblocked, which is like we're really, really focused on building an incredible product that solves a real problem. And then from there, you can do marketing, you can build go-to-market and do all that kind of stuff. But if you have an amazing product launch and the product sucks, you're just lighting money on fire.
And what is like the key problem with Unblocked? Like we talked about in the pre-chat, but like what is that kind of focus? Like what is the problem? And especially like, larger companies and have kind of like a legacy code base is kind of like that focus, right?
Yeah. So the problem that we're trying to solve basically is as engineers in most organizations, it's really painful to get the information that they need in their day-to-day workflow to like actually help them implement features or fix bugs, whatever it is. And that's a consequence of like this tribal knowledge that exists within that organization is scattered and spread across all these different data sources. So some of the information is in the source code. Some of it is in their documentation systems like Jira. Some of it's in their messaging platforms like Slack. And so if you're new to a team or you're re-platforming and you're trying to understand, well, what are all these decisions that were made 5, 10, 15 years ago? It's completely unapproachable for you. What Unblocked does is basically take that source code, augment it with the data and discussions that exist in all these different places. And it's like having an extended member of the team where you can ask a question and you get an expert level response immediately, right? So again, the mediocrity of my engineering skills and my impatience, I'm like, I want to be able to ask and get an expert level answer on Sunday night at 11 o'clock and not have to wait for a piece of feedback, right? Or for an answer.
What are some things that when you were like building Buddy Build and now with Unblocked that are different? Or maybe something you thought was like, I need to do things this way, or like I have really strong opinions on this thing, and second time around you're like, that didn't really matter too much. Or is it kind of like, has it been very consistent in terms of decisions or ways you've been thinking about building?
It's a great question. Again, we're building a tool for developers. So there's some constructs or some constraints that are locked, right? Like you have to build an amazing product. I personally have very low tolerance for a bad experience in any interaction with a company. So like we are incredibly responsive in terms of like I answer a lot of the technical support, right? And I did that in Buddy Build. I still do it to this day because I want people to have an amazing experience. Differences, I remember when we were fundraising for Buddy Build, there was a lot of rhetoric around there's no money in developer tools. Like there's no big companies that are built around developer tools. Whereas now you look at developer tools and there's like an infinite number of them basically. On any given day, there's more and more being born. And so that changes some of the kind of approach that you use for marketing and go to market and things of that nature.
How do you think about like companies using it? Like, are you looking at like kind of like a product-led growth and top-down? Like, are you looking at it like, hey, like a CTO loves this, or I know them well, and like they'll start using Unblocked? Or is it a bit more like, hey, this developer at AWS on this team and that team can start using it individually? How do you kind of think about that from a growth strategy?
Yeah, so there's different ways that the product gets adopted. I think you need a combination of both. So I distinctly remember at Buddy Build, this person reached out like in our intercom, our support product, and said like, "Hey, I'm the VP of engineering at News Corp,
Mm.
and I'd love to use Buddy Build here." And I was like, "This is one of my friends that's like trolling me for sure." You know what I mean? I'm like, "Why the?" But it was actually, I remember his name. And News Corp, owns a lot of like significant media properties,
Mm.
and that kind of goes to show you how you have to transition from product-led growth. He was able to sign up and use it for his project to like selling into News Corp, which has a security and procurement process, so on and so forth. Inevitably, what we found is that like there's certain classes of customers that have specific requirements and needs that are serviced relative to their organization's requirements. And then there's, people who just don't want to talk to anyone and be able to use the product. So we'll do both.
When you talk about like making the product like great, like what are some elements that kind of go into that to make it kind of like other words could be like rock solid? Like how do you kind of like what are the kind of things that actually make up that?
So there's two parts to this answer. One is, I think, very specific, right? Which is, and one is just kind of, I don't know, oddly like hard to describe. But so the first is like, for the longest time, developers were treated as second-class citizens. It's like if you're a developer, who gives a shit what the user experience looks like? You know what I mean? It could be whatever color and kind of whatever font. And like, I remember working at Microsoft, and one of the engineers there would intentionally make it ugly just so that someone in design would have to go and fix it. But no one cared about the user experience for a developer. That is like 180 degrees for our philosophy. To this day, I run into people who use Buddy Build and just love the user experience. So that is one thing that is super important for us. How do we build that though? I'm reminded of this kind of analogy of like, what makes a really great soup or a steak or what have you. It's like, well, there's a little bit of like science and there's a little bit of like art behind it. And so sometimes someone just needs to come in and say like, we need a little bit more salt or a little bit more pepper, or that should be cooked a little less, or whatever it might be. So finding that ingredient is kind of a matter of taste. And that's not to say that I have great taste by any stretch of the imagination, but like certainly the team that we've pulled together shares that underlying principle of like kind of being ambitious malcontents, right? Which is like we just constantly want to make it slightly better and refining that taste so that that user experience does feel amazing for folks. I use tons of products. I can think of one, even, I'm not going to say it, but I was thinking about it this morning. It's like, wow, there's so many counter examples to this, which is you can build an absolute dog shit product that like no one likes and have a wildly successful business. But I don't think I would want, that's not something I would be proud of, like as a, building software is a science and an art. And so like all artists, I think you want that product to be respected and liked or what have you, not rammed down your throat because some guy said you have to buy this thing.
100%.
Yeah.
I think you were doing a talk recently and you said something like, rule number 1, don't F it up. Like, what did you mean by that? And then is there rule number 2 and 3, or is it just one rule?
Look, what I found is like, if you obey rule number 1, you don't need any other rules, right? So it's like, it is, yeah, that's an incredible depth of research that you've done. Yeah, it is. Up until this point, the companies that I've built so far, and maybe even as a personal rule set, don't F it up is the number 1 rule. And it kind of serves 2 purposes. One is like, it gives people the autonomy to use their own values, which we hope are, well thought through, to be like, you make the decision, just don't mess it up, right? So we don't want a ton of decision-making committees or processes or whatever it might be. We want employees to feel empowered to like go and do that. That's a meta point. And then the first order point is like, don't fuck it up. So straightforward.
Unblocked be like useful if like AI hadn't have had this, and we've been talking about AI in like every recording today, which is constant. But I think it's just like, does AI unlock Unblocked? Like, are you able to, like, is this kind of a step change or like a kind of a movement where it's like, hey, like this business actually like makes sense to do now because Gen AI is more useful?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I had struggled this internal dialogue. There's a lot of hype around AI in general, and then specifically AI dev tools. And so maybe a contrarian view on this, but like, I don't know why you care what technology I use to solve a problem. right? Like, yeah, we use a ton of AI because it does empower these solutions like you were never able to do.
Yeah.
Like it is, we are at the right place at the right time with the right background to kind of go and execute against this vision. Now we'll see if we do it, but like it is an opportunity that comes very, very infrequently in life. But like, I've seen the transition from on-premise to cloud, from cloud to mobile. This is, and I'm, a pretty skeptical person. The rate at which this is changing and the nature of the way that it can change and improve overall product experiences and like the industry in general, I've never seen anything like it. Like it's unimaginable what we're doing 6 months ago or a year ago for sure. There's no way I would have imagined that we could do what we're doing now in that time frame. So yeah, it is a big unlock for Unblocked, which is you're the only person who say that successfully. Even sometimes I struggle with it, but yeah, absolutely.
What kind of trends are you seeing? Like, obviously, it's like, hey, like a large code base, like we can like review that. When I had Farhan from Shopify on, he said like we're deleting a lot of code. It's like, hey, it's making more people more productive. They can do more code or better code. I feel like there's just so many different aspects that it's working on. And what kind of trends are you seeing as like the most impactful? Is it all of those, or is it like certain ones that are really kind of moving the needle?
Yeah, I think the first order application, certainly within the developer ecosystem, is code generation, right? Like the ability for me to write more code. And we've had kind of different flavors of that. But long story short, developers are writing more code now than they probably have in the past. I heard this great snippet, which is like there's probably been more technical debt accrued in the last 6 months than in the entire history of software because of the rate at which people are writing code. They have no idea what it does. so, I think if you think through what that means is like a bunch of code is getting deleted, but increasingly people are becoming more reliant on these tools and might not necessarily know why or how some of these decisions were made. And so I think that is a significant tailwind for Unblocked, right? So that is, and we've seen that to date already, where Unblocked can contextualize the code that's being written so that it makes sense for that organization. So their coding standards or their best practices or factoring in the decisions that they use to build the system that they have today.
How important is context in that space? Like for me and maybe most people that will be watching or listening to this, maybe not a lot of experience with actual coding. Like, how good is that? Like if you're using a tool like a windsurf or a cursor and it's just pumping out code but it doesn't have the context, does it just lead you completely down the wrong rabbit hole? Like how important is context in like dictating like how developer team work?
So there's two parts of that in my mind. One, depending on the application that you're building, if you are, trying to build an MVP project, I don't know, the context doesn't really matter because it's a greenfield project, right? There is no history. There's no context that's needed in order to start something from scratch.
Yeah.
That said, most organizations don't get to go file a new project very frequently. They're taking something that already works or some piece of architecture or something that's there and they're extending it or fixing it or improving it in some way. And so in that scenario, it's really important that you have the context for how things work. Forget about software for a second, right? If you're a person and you're, I don't know, a framer of a building, right? You're going to go build a house and someone says to you, I'd like you to build me a house. And you go and you build like a single story, 600-foot cabin. And they're like, no. I have like a family of 6 and I need a garage. And, we live in a floodplain. So it needs to, all that context matters a lot, right? To the person who's actually going and doing it. So they need to know the environment in which they're operating in. And then the person itself, like the first time you frame a house, it's going to take you a long time. It's not going to be probably as level and as straight and so on and so forth. And you're probably not using the best tools. You talk to framers who've been in that industry for 15, 20 years, they know the context of the skill to do it in an incredibly efficient way. And I've seen that in a specific example where we're building a little project and you watch the experienced framers bang through it very, very quickly, whereas the other folks are kind of struggling to figure out how that works.
How do you think about it? Is there any impact on like what like kind of architecture is or what language they're coding in or what tools they're using? Do any of those things kind of affect Unblocked, or is Unblocked kind of designed in a way that can be kind of used with any environment, any company, any?
Yeah, it is largely agnostic as opposed to the language that people are using, like the programming language that they're using. One of the things that has been like a delightful kind of learning for us is that Unblocked empowers people to cross language boundaries, like spoken language boundaries. So often teams are working remotely, right? And so some members of the team might speak English and others might Mandarin or Portuguese or Spanish or whatever it might be. And so Unblocked gives you the ability to ask questions and get immediate responses, right? So even if you're time shifted, you don't have to wait to get a response, which like removing that latency speeds up the ability for people to get work done. And then you factor in the fact that they can't speak, or sometimes there's some awkwardness or apprehension around maybe my English skills aren't as great, or, I don't want to ask this person, there's some loss in translation. So people can actually ask Unblocked in their native language, even though the information is in English, and get the answer in their native language back. So it's incredible to see how that technology, we kind of spoke to a little bit, like how you can get these very, very technical answers immediately and remove any of the friction around, any language boundaries that you might have.
I'm curious, just like on like circling back to like taste there. I like to just kind of like double click on that, because I've had like a few other conversations over the past few months with folks on the technical side, and they're just like, like taste seems to be becoming more and more important in this space. So maybe I'll just double tap on that, and like, do you have any other kind of like thoughts or like strong opinions on taste when it comes to like designing products?
Yeah, I think it comes in some capacity to be table stakes now. I think because like if you think about the inception, I think developers didn't really care what something looked like. And then it became somewhat of a differentiated strategy, or something that differentiated you from other tools as the place got kind of, where those spaces got filled. And so increasingly, the user experience really does matter to people, because they start to develop an expectation for what that should look like. I don't know. I think if you were to ask the world's best chefs, like, how do you make a good soup? And they can tell you the ingredients, but it really comes down to like their experience at some point to tell you, for you to get like, an amazing soup at the end of the day.
What are your thoughts on like kind of what the future of all these tools, Unblocked, everything else in this AI ecosystem for developers? Like, I was talking to a CTO last week where like the board comes to him and says, "Hey, I just saw this video on Twitter. Someone used this vibe coding tool. Like, why is your team moving so slow? Like, when I saw someone build an app." Like, what are your thoughts on like what is real right now? What's kind of like, it's a cool demo video, but maybe it's just not there yet? Like, where do you think things are actually at, and maybe like what do you think things are heading towards in the next 5-ish years?
Yeah. So I think it's a super exciting time, right? Like, I think even as consumers, people use things like ChatGPT to automate a lot of the stuff that they used to find very cumbersome in the past. But as it applies to developers, with this excitement comes a lot of hype, like a lot of hyperbole, a lot of like, I don't know, probably fake it till you make it. And so, it's interesting to see kind of how that plays out. I think in the short term, and we've already started to see this, a lot of the stuff that like demos really well doesn't really work. Right. And so I can think of a handful of products that had like absolutely industry shifting, amazing product launches. And then that thing literally does not work. And so I was like, I don't know what the purpose of that is, or what the point of that is. So I think we will see a pullback, and then we'll see who actually, what's that expression? It's like, we'll see who's wearing shorts when the tide kind of pulls away or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Who's wearing a bathing suit or some weird thing like that. And so I think that's the first thing that's going to happen. In steady state, I think, we'll go back to that framer example.
Yeah.
Any framer who's like putting a building together with a hammer is like significantly disadvantaged to someone who's using a nail gun, right? And so I think people will need to up-level their skills, and the people who do that will have, that will become the new norm. And if you don't, you kind of get left behind. You probably don't get as much work or as efficiency or what have you.
Yeah.
People often ask, like, will there be a completely autonomous software developer?
Yeah.
I think that's often, you talked about like, oh, my board said this. My question is like, how many of those people who asked the question have built software of any meaningful scale?
Yeah.
Because you do need taste as you're building, as you build these systems over time, and a lot of experience. And so, I mean, today is the worst that this technology will ever be. Like tomorrow will be better, and the day after that will be better, right? So like it is improving every single day. Does it get to a place where it's completely autonomous? I think if it does, then we probably have like more significant problems to solve, right? Like I was like, maybe it starts to think about like, well, why do we work for these humans? Why don't we just do it ourselves or something? So we'll see.
If you were to use like that framework context and like, hey, at least you start with the manual hand tools and then you kind of upgrade, whereas maybe people newer in their career, younger, it's not, they don't always have to be younger, but newer in their career, like are instantly jumping into using these tools right away.
Yeah.
Is that like a bad thing? Is it not a good or bad thing? Like, how do you kind of think about that? Should people be starting with no augmentation, then kind of moving into it? How do you think about that?
Yeah, the analogy I was thinking about is like, I can see the school that I went to, I said, from here, right?
Yeah.
And I was incredibly frustrated going to university because I was like, I am paying to work. No one's paying me to do this work. I was like, why am I doing this? This is crazy to me. Like, I finished high school. I want to start making money. This is useless. And so one of the things that I learned over time is like that actually provided a lot of the first principles or fundamentals that I was going to need, not only in terms of like computer science, but also like how to think critically and how to think systematically and like to understand, the building blocks that then get applied for, decades later. And so I think there needs to be this sweet spot of people being grounded in first principles and then extending that and making that better using these tools. But you can, quite often tell when people haven't necessarily learned that skill set to start off with and just try to vibe code their way through something.
We talked about like getting the band back together and like there's some trust there. How do you find about, and I think this is probably like a common problem that a lot of founders face, is like attracting top developer talent to come work at their early stage startup when maybe they're making great money, they work at hard problems, or at like a big scaled company, or they work at Amazon. Like, how do you kind of get those individuals to join your startup? There's probably like a ton of things that go into that, but maybe there's a few key things that's worked well for you.
Yeah, so typically, I mean, when I left Amazon to start Buddy Build, I went from like, a fairly significant paycheck to like basically peanuts by comparison, right? And so I remember reading this blog post a long time ago. Let's take a step back, actually. It depends on what you're optimizing for, right? So it's like if you're optimizing for money, you should not go join an early stage company, right? You're not going to get paid as well. Statistically speaking, most of them don't work out. But that shouldn't, from my perspective, be, and it's easy to say that, like, depending on your situation, but like optimizing for money is not necessarily the best thing to optimize for. So if you take into consideration other aspects, so that blog post that I was kind of thinking about is like you either optimize for money or you optimize for learning, right? And so in a startup, you learn way more than you do in a big company. In a big company, you learn a set of skills. Like my advice has been for a long time, you should go to a place like Microsoft or Facebook or Google or whatever, any of these places, for probably like 2 years after you graduate university, because you actually, or college or whatever, because you learn how to build software, right? So it's like the practical process of like from scratch or, implementing that meaningful software development lifecycle at a big scale. But shortly thereafter that, then you're starting to learn things that are bespoke to that organization. So like I think after 2-3 years at one of those companies, you should go join a small company, because you go from something that's very, very specialized in solving these like little problems to like your scope just dramatically changes, right? Like my criterion for what I like to work on and what I hope that like the folks who work on the team like to work on, it's like it should matter if you're gone for a couple of days. Like if it doesn't matter, it's probably not a great, it should impact the business in some way.
Yeah.
And an early stage. Now, there's all sorts of like unhealthy things that come with that. But like, if you're optimized for learning, absolutely, you should be working in a small company. So when people apply and they're like, well, I'm getting paid a whole bunch of money, I was like, then you should absolutely stay there. Because like, we'll pay you a decent amount of money. You won't be like optimizing for money, but you will be optimizing for learning.
How much faster, and maybe you don't have like metrics, but maybe it's just you feel like you're going faster, is your team kind of moving right now from like a code perspective? Like I'm sure when Buddy Bill was around, maybe you were using Copilot or things like that. I don't know, maybe even that was before then.
Oh, yeah,
but
way before.
like,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious, like how meaningful of a difference do you notice in terms of like output, or is it some different other metric that you're looking at?
Yeah, I think for certain types of coding, certain projects and certain things, there's no question that, and I don't know, is it like we've heard so many different numbers, even over the last, whatever it is, 18 to 24 months. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, you're going to be 2x or 5x or 10x faster, whatever it is. I don't know. I don't know how to like measure that consistently across, various populations. I do know that on the margin, people enjoy using these products. And so when you think about how resource intensive developers are, to the degree that you can make their jobs better, and it's an incremental cost relative to the benefit, why wouldn't you do that, right? $8, $10, $12, $50, $100 a month or whatever for someone you're paying $100, $125, $200, $250,000 a year.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like a very reasonable investment.
I think last question for me, maybe shifting gears a little bit, but more just like Vancouver tech in general, like obviously like launching the Amazon office, like you see the impact, like you can just go down the street and see like how many people are working there. You built startups here that have been acquired by major companies. So you've done like kind of the full gambit, I feel like. Like what is just your thoughts on like all these different things kind of working in conjunction to make Vancouver tech where it is right now? Where do you think Vancouver tech is like currently? How can things get better? Like,
yeah, I think like if you look back, you go back 15 years ago, there weren't a ton of opportunities for people to like, quote unquote, move back home. I mean, like in some capacity, I was solving my problem, right? My own problem, right? Like I wanted to move back to Vancouver and I couldn't find something that was interesting in a place that I love that paid well.
yeah.
Now there's tons of jobs here, and they're from big companies to small companies, right? So like first order, you have a ton of options to live in one of the most beautiful places in the world, and be able to do that, right? The second order thing though is that like people who work at those big companies and develop those skills or have that expertise go and start their own companies or join early stage companies and make it stronger. So it is like, the ecosystem play that I kind of imagined is nice to see that happening. I don't take full credit to it. There's lots of people who've like started companies or helped bring other folks here. But I think it's very easy to kind of get either dismissed or lost on the West Coast. And there's a lot of really compelling things that are happening here, and the rate is accelerating. So, Unblocked is a part of that, but we're just trying to give people that opportunity.
I love it. Dennis, it's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you spending some time with me, and glad we could do this in person.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Appreciate
great.
it. Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Was it useful?
It was very useful.
All right.
I loved
there
it.
you go.
Thank you.
My pleasure.